Hello and welcome to another video from the only source of information that you need to not only survive the current apocalypse but actually enjoy it. And today we're back out here at my school bus because we're going to be talking about what you need to know before you actually go out and purchase a school bus. This video is not going to be about all of the reasons why a school bus is superior to or inferior to any other kind of vehicle. This is simply going to be about the things you need to know so that you can be an educated consumer before you end up with a 35,000-pound mechanical device sitting in your yard that you can't use. The first thing we're going to talk about is engine type. There are two types of engine that you're going to run across, and that's gasoline and diesel. Now, there are propane-powered school buses and electrical-powered school buses, I think. But you really don't want something that you're not going to be able to find fuel for. So don't even think about those unless you live in an area where they have propane and you have no intention of ever driving anywhere outside of your hometown. Now on this particular bus, we've got a diesel engine. And I know that you're not really able to see enough detail to make that determination from the video, but right here is a fuel line running into an injector in the top of this cylinder. Now on a gasoline engine you would have a spark plug, and it wouldn't necessarily be right here. It could be somewhere on top of the valve cover or on the side of your head or something like that. But the main difference that you're going to see when you're looking at an engine to determine whether it's a diesel engine or a gasoline engine is whether or not it has spark plugs. That's really not going to be important as you're shopping because all buses will be listed as to whether they have a gasoline or a diesel engine. So you're not going to have to make that determination yourself. Now it's time for the important stuff. I honestly cannot imagine any reason why anybody would purchase a gasoline-powered school bus over a diesel bus for a bunch of reasons. Now, when I purchased mine, I knew I wanted a diesel engine because diesel engines last longer and get better fuel economy. Most buses have a 60-gallon tank. My buses say averages around 10 miles per gallon, so that means I can go 600 miles before I have to fuel up. Now, the reality is it doesn't get 10 miles per gallon. It gets between 7 and 11, but right around 9.5 miles per gallon on average. And with a diesel bus, you know, that's really probably the best you're ever going to do. But with a gasoline-powered bus, you're really only going to get about 5 miles per gallon or less. Most people I know of that have a gasoline-powered school bus, relatively large one, they're getting 4 miles per gallon. So a 60-gallon tank is only going to get you about 250 miles. Now, with diesel, it's more difficult to locate sources of fuel. Not every gas station sells diesel, but you can really kind of mitigate that by going to a truck stop and purchasing a GPS. You know, those GPS machines you get at Walmart, if you're looking for a gas station, you press gas station, it takes you to a gas station. I think the ones they sell at the truck stop actually will only take you to a gas station that sells diesel, or at least they give you that option. But another thing is, when I bought this, I was told that this was the million-mile motor. You can get 1,000,000 miles on it, which I think is kind of unreasonable. But I have talked to quite a few diesel mechanics. My best friend is a diesel mechanic, and he's telling me that he knows that they have a vehicle that if it hasn't got 1,000,000 miles on it, it's pretty doggone close. They said they usually get rid of their fleet trucks because they're falling apart. Not because the engines stop working, but because the bodies just have too many problems to fix. And it's commercial business. You don't want to be driving around in junk. But that doesn't mean that diesel engines will go 1,000,000 miles before you have to change them out. I have read posts by people who, one man in particular runs a busing company, said that he got about 200,000 miles if he was lucky. I talked to my diesel mechanic friend about it. He said if that's the case, he's probably operating these vehicles with a different driver every shift, probably inside of a city where it's stop and go, constant stop and go, and there's probably other things involved because in general, they never had to rebuild an engine at the shop where he was working. Now, another thing that is going to be important about diesel is the fact that fuels break down over time. Gasoline in particular. I went on a cruise one time when I was in the military, and so I parked my car, came home 6 months later, and it was a nightmare. It took us 2 days to get that car running because everything was fouled up and it had to change the gasoline out. The gasoline that was in the vehicle had broken down. There are things you can do to mitigate that. You can get this stuff that it's a fuel stabilizer. In fact, it's called Sta-Bil. You put that in there and it extends the life of the fuel a little longer. And that's what people do with their lawnmowers. If they get a gasoline-powered lawnmower, they'll pour that stuff in at the end of the season. Next summer, when the grass is growing again, lawnmowers start right up. But that doesn't last forever. When I purchased this bus, it had been sitting for 6 years. I put a battery in it, and I drove it from Florida to Mississippi on 6-year-old gasoline. Well, actually, probably about 3-year-old gasoline, because I topped the tank off while I was in Pensacola. And so it was half the gas in it was brand new, and the other half was 6 years old. But the gas that was in it when I started it was 6-year-old gas. And it just, you can do that. And why that's important is that you're driving your automobile every day, you're never gonna run into this problem because your gas that's in your car is never old enough to deteriorate to the point where it won't start your car. But if you've got a school bus that's converted into a motorhome, you're not gonna be driving that every day. Even if you go into races or go into ball games, you're gonna have a period where the thing is sitting. And most people, the bus sits all year just for a single vacation. So that's going to turn into an absolute nightmare every time you try to start it if you've got a gasoline-powered vehicle. A bus engine can be located in the front of the bus, the rear of the bus, and even in the middle of the bus. The two body styles of bus that you're going to come across are the conventional or dog-nose bus, like what you see here, where the engine compartment actually sits out in front of the passenger compartment directly over the front wheels. The other type of bus is a transit bus, which can have the engine in the front, in the rear, or in the middle. My initial concern when I found out that different school buses had their engines located in different places was my ability to locate someone willing to work on the engine, or how much it would cost to get work done on the engine depending on its location. In the past, I had personally worked on automobiles where the engine sat out in front of the passenger compartment, and I had also worked on vans where the engine actually sat underneath the driver's compartment. So I understood the complexity of working on an engine that was hidden within the body as opposed to one that was easy to get to. I was also concerned about how the location of the engine would affect the engineering of the drivetrain. I understood from my experience with automobiles that anytime a manufacturer decides to start putting an engine in a different location, they usually have to do radical alterations to the engines themselves. I didn't want something that was so exotic that no one would know how to work on it. But fortunately, that's not the case. All school bus engines and transmissions are industry standard engines and transmissions that are used in other types of commercial vehicles. Now, initially, all school buses were conventionals. That means the kind where you've got a compartment for the people and a separate little compartment sticking out in front of the bus for the engine. And basically the reason for that was that's the way they were making cars, that's the way they were making trucks. It just made sense that when they started making school buses, they'd make them like everything else that was on the roads. But eventually somebody figured out that it might be a good idea to put the engine inside of the compartment some way with the people. Just separate them by putting it below the driver's feet or something. And there's a good reason for that. The amount of people that you carry in the bus is limited by the length. The law limits the length of a school bus to 45 feet. And I really don't think I've ever even seen one because there aren't too many places where a 45-foot bus would be practical. They're difficult to turn. You can't go down dirt roads in them. You can't go over railroad tracks. And so in my life, I may have seen one 45-foot bus. And if I did, it was on the internet. And I really couldn't confirm it because it was just a picture and it just seemed like a really long bus. But in real life, you'll probably never see one, never be able to acquire one. But with 40-foot buses, it's just as easy to drive a 40-foot conventional as it is to drive a 40-foot transit because they're measured from bumper to bumper. You know, that's what you have to maneuver around town is the entire length of the bus. If you've got 6 foot of the bus as engine, that means you've lost 6 foot of interior space. In this bus, it's 34 foot is what it's considered. But it's really only 28 foot in here. So like I say, you lose about 6 feet. So that's the distance from the dash all the way back to that rear window. That comes out to about 2 rows of seats, which is 16, what, 2, 4, no, 8 to 12 kids that you ain't going to be able to carry because you're carrying that engine. And you can't put them kids up on top of the engine. So anyway, for drivability and for maximum amount of space, you really want to have a flat nose bus. Now all you have to figure out is what is better, the front engine flat nose bus, the rear engine flat nose bus, or the mid engine. The mid engines I cannot say because I've never messed with one. They're a lot bigger engine, a lot more powerful engine. They're kind of like comparable to a big rig engine, an 18-wheeler. Whereas these, most school buses don't have that. The engine is much smaller, and so, you know, that's why they can get away with putting it in the front or the back. But, so we're not going to talk about the mid-engine buses, but with the front-engine buses and the rear-engine buses, there is a big benefit to having a rear-engine bus. If there's only 2 people in there, 1 person in there driving, having the engine in the rear makes it much more comfortable for the driver because this thing is really noisy. But if you're in a 40-foot bus with an engine in the back, it's really, really quiet up front. Now, that's not what the school boards were thinking of when they bought these things, and they paid a lot more for the rear-engine buses than they do for the front-engine buses, about $10,000 from what I understand. But they're thinking about the big picture. Over time, maintenance on a rear-engine bus is cheaper, and I think that's got a lot to do with time. And it's probably not universal for all buses, but if you're looking at pictures of school buses, flat-nose school buses with front engines, you'll notice that everything is really tight in there. Like it's very difficult to change your oil filter and your fuel filter and your air filter, change belts and hoses, common maintenance. But with the rear engines, on some of them, when all of the doors are open, it's like you could sit in there with the engine and reach every inch of it without hardly exerting yourself at all. So that might be another really good reason why you would want a rear engine flat nose as opposed to a front engine flat nose. But another reason that I'm finding out myself because I'm getting older every day is when the engine's in the front, there's a hump there. It ain't much of a hump. It's not that big of a deal. Most people can go right around it and jump into their seat without a problem. But when you start getting older, that turns into a lot of work. So if you've got the engine right there under your feet, and it's a front engine rig, flat nose, you're going to have to be going over that hump for however long you plan on owning that bus. And if you plan on owning it for life, there's going to be a point when you don't want to do that anymore. Now, another reason, now the front nose, you know, the dog nose buses with the engine sitting out over the tires are probably as easy to work on as the rear engine flat nose bus engines. But if you're going to be traveling in this thing, and especially, you know, if you've got some hair, you just got to know that the police are going to be pulling you over every now and then. And if you got one of those dog nose buses that's typically seen as a hippie bus, you're going to get harassed a lot more than if you're driving a nice, clean-looking, flat-nose bus. That's just what people say. They also say that if you decide you want to stay in a campground, a lot of times campgrounds will turn school buses, converted school buses, away. But if you've got a flat-nose bus and it's got a decent paint jobs, a lot of these parks, campgrounds, that have signs up saying no school buses allowed will still let you in. And just to illustrate this, maybe a month ago I was driving along and there was a school bus. I saw it pull over into a parking lot and it had flowers on it and dolphins and all that kind of stuff. And I said, well, I got to talk to these people. I'm not shy about approaching someone that's obviously in a converted school bus, obviously hippies. So I went in there and I asked them, hey, what are y'all doing? We're trying to get our kids back. See, I didn't really realize where I was, but it was Department of Social Services. I said, well, what happened? They said, well, we pulled into Walmart parking lot. We went right over where all the other campers were parked. Because if you've ever noticed, people camp for free at Walmart parking lots, and they'll always be way away from where the customers park, as a courtesy, on both ends. And they said, a cop just came in our bus. And I said, well, what were you doing? They said, we weren't doing anything. He just came on the bus. I said, well, why did they take your kids? Well, when he came on board, I said, if you don't have a search warrant, you're going to have to get off of our bus because I didn't invite you in here. These were young people. They think that the Constitution's real or whatever. So, and I explained to them, when a cop comes on your bus or in your house, you say, yes, officer, how can I help you? You don't start talking about your rights. But before they got done, these two people were arrested for no reason, supposedly, and their kids were taken from them. Now, I don't know if their story has any truth to it at all. I know that they were in a bus and they were parked at social services. And I didn't get to interview the police officer, so I don't know both sides of the story. But it does illustrate the fact that if you present yourself as a hippie, you may be exposed to a lot more trouble than the average person. So that's another reason not to have a conventional bus. You have a flat-nosed bus. And like I said, if you're going to have a rear engine or a front engine, it's best to get the rear engine. Now, the rear engines are about $10,000 more than the front engines, but by the time the schools get done with them, they're the same price. The next thing we're going to talk about is interior height. When I purchased my bus, I wanted a bus. All I knew was that buses were buses. I didn't know that they made tall buses and short buses. And by tall and short, I mean interior-wise. The interior of a bus can be probably, this is probably the shortest at 5'10", and I think 6'6" is the tallest. I think, but I'm sure that there are exceptions to the rule. Anyways, when I bought my bus, I didn't really think about it because I thought they were all the same, but unfortunately, I'm freakishly tall. Now, if you're a normal sized person, 5'6" of headroom is more than adequate unless you plan on doing gymnastics or something. In that case, you're probably going to have to cut the roof off and raise it. And that's what people do. When I got my bus, I thought there's no way in the world I would ever do anything like that. But then when I got the bus, I said, well, that actually sounds like a pretty good idea. But a much better solution is to simply get a bus that's got a tall interior. And there are no secrets to doing this other than just to contact the people selling the bus and ask them, please go out and measure the bus and tell me how tall it is, because that's important to me. And because, if it's a local bus, you go there and you measure it yourself. But, a lot of times you'll see the bus you want, your dream bus, and it's 3 states away. So anyway, just so you can see, I'm not standing on a stool or nothing. This thing is really short. Like I say, I am really, really tall. And when I bought the bus, it still was not that big of an issue at the time because I was 40 years old or something. But now that I'm 57, 56, something like that, this is terrible. So I'm not going to cut the roof off of this and raise it because I'm at the point now where I can't walk around like this because I can't cut a roof off a bus and raise it anymore. I'm at that point in my life where I don't do those kinds of things. We're going to sell this bus and eventually get a flat-nosed bus, shorter flat-nosed bus with a lot more headroom. While we're talking about raising the roof of a bus, there's some things you really need to know. A lot of people, if they're going to cut the roof off and raise it, they're not going to go for a 7-foot interior in the bus or 8-foot interior. They're going to go like 12 feet. And by law, you can drive down the highway in something that's, I think, 13 foot 6 inches because that's what all overpasses by law are designed to handle. But a lot of places are not the highway and they don't have to have 13 foot 6 inches of clearance. They can make clearance any height they want as long as they put a sign somewhere saying this bridge is really low or whatever. Problem is that, you know, when you're driving, I don't care what you're driving or how long you've been driving, those things, you know, they're really going to be difficult to spot. You're driving along, you're listening to your music, and next thing you know, the roof is gone. So I really don't recommend raising the roof of a bus. I think it's a good idea to just stick with the roof that's on there for a lot of reasons. One is the more area you got to the front of your bus, the worse your fuel economy is going to be, the slower it's going to go, the less clearance you have, and the less structural integrity you have. When these buses come out of the factory, they're some of the safest vehicles on the road because they're full of children. And so, you know, the standards that are set are much more stringent than what are set for your automobile. I'm going to show you something else. Now we're parked in the woods, so that's why it doesn't look like it's not parked in the woods. This thing here is about a good 18 inches, maybe 24 inches of clearance, which means that if you have railroad tracks to cross, you know, a lot of times the railroad tracks are elevated in a lot of places. Well, if you've got railroad tracks to cross, then you might get stuck. Happens all the time. We had a big charter bus come along a while back, going to the casinos. I live near casinos, and they were going over the railroad tracks and they got stuck. Fortunately, he called his boss, called 911, whatever, and the police were able to call the railroad and stop the train. Very strange, but just a few weeks after that, another one got stuck. Before they could get the people off, a train hit them, and some of those people died. Because unlike a school bus, which is designed to go all kinds of places where kids live, these charter buses are just basically designed to get people from the bus company to the casino, to the resort, wherever. The places they have to go are normally designed to take that kind of a transportation. If you get a school bus, you can go anywhere. If you get the right school bus. They're starting to add luggage racks to the bottom of school buses. And they're putting all kinds of stuff under there. People who buy these things and convert them will put water tanks and sewage tanks under the school bus, which also limits the amount of clearance that you're going to have. Now, one way to mitigate it, if you get a bus that's got a real low floor, once again, is to go to a truck stop to get your GPS, because GPSs that are for big rigs normally will steer you away from areas like that, because big rigs can get stuck too. Now, as important as clearance is to getting into places where most people can't get, length is going to be a big issue too, because the longer a bus is, the more clearance you're going to need. Now, the good thing about it is, like, if you get a smaller bus, a lot of times a smaller, shorter bus, they don't reduce the clearance. And so, I mean, every brand is different, every year is different, but if you get a long bus and a short bus from the same year, same manufacturer, in general, they're both going to have the same ride height. So you can actually, like if you get a short enough bus with enough height, it's basically an off-road vehicle. Now, the reason that's important is because most people who are going to be staying at campgrounds and never really going off the beaten path, they're going to go out and buy them an RV. And so none of this is going to be that much of an issue for them. But for the people who are even thinking about a school bus as a camper, that's generally somebody who's thinking outside of the box, hippie types, you know, people that don't want to park at a campground. They want to park right on the beach or out in the desert or up in the mountains somewhere. And so, you know, you got to take into consideration how easy it's going to be to get around. If you're just one person, you certainly don't need anything that long. And if you're a big family, you're going to need something a little bit longer. In fact, nowadays, another movement that hippies are getting involved in is this tiny house movement. And we're not talking about people that want to go camping. We're talking about people that just want a house that's mobile, so if they get sick of their neighbors or sick of their neighborhood, they can move. In that instance, you're not going to have to worry about gas or diesel. You're not going to have to worry about engine placement. What you really need to do is get the absolutely biggest bus you can get that's a flat nose and turn that into a house. I highly recommend waiting patiently until a 45-footer comes along. But a 45-footer is not going to be a very good thing to have if you're going you know, to the beach. Oh well. As you can see here, the bus is still where it was the last time that I made a video. And the last video I made, I said that I was going to go ahead and put a battery in this and make a video of that. But if you remember, we had a really bad flu hit. And I laid up in the bed for about 30 days. And in that 30 days, a whole bunch of chores started piling up. So when I finally got healthy, all of my ideas about what I wanted to do had changed. So now with my new priorities, it may be a while before I get a battery in this bus, but it is going to happen, and I will set a camera up on the day that I do it. Hopefully I'll just put it in there and I'll start the bus up. But my good buddy, the diesel mechanic, has already said that he wants to come over here when I try to start this bus. So I'll have help. In any case, if you haven't subscribed to my channel, please do so. And as always, if you do not want to survive, don't listen to me.